Okay, then over the next few slides we're going to look at the structure of a narrative, and often you'll see the structure represented like this. So far we've looked at this section, but we haven't really looked at much of the other parts. So we're going to look at a little bit at these today, and a little bit of a reminder about this as well. Okay, so as I said, we've looked so far at the orientation, which you've been working on with your description of characterization or characters and with setting. Now, as you can see listed here are a number of things that the orientation should do. Now, if you use your descriptive language, your sensory description, your figurative language, and the techniques to describe your character and setting, you will capture the audience's attention, establish mood, do all of the things that are described on this slide. Okay, so you've already been given the tools to do this part. Okay, we've looked at orientation, now we're going to look at problem or complication. In order for a narrative to be a narrative, there has to be a problem or a complication that affects the main character. The problem doesn't have to be physical. There are lots of the problems that can affect the character. They could be external or they could be internal, and these are some of the ones that could happen. Depending on what the basic idea of your story is, will dictate perhaps what causes the problem. These are just some examples. There are lots more. Okay, once we've established our character, we've given them a problem, we also need to think about what their experiences are going to be within this narrative. We often call this rising tension or action, which means normally for the character that they have to go through some sort of journey, they have to experience some events in their attempt to solve their conflict or the crisis. There are normally more problems that affect the character. It'd be a pretty boring story if we had them have the problem and in the next paragraph it was solved. So we build up tension by creating further problems that are linked to their overall problem. Might be the weather changes if it was something happening in nature, or another person joins forces with their enemy, or somebody betrays them who they thought was trying to help them. So a whole range of things that could happen. So now we look at the climax or turning point, which is the point that the story should be leading to. It's what we're aiming for the character to achieve, or in some cases it'll be the moment that they discover a way to solve their problem, and then they set about solving their problem. Sometimes we might describe it as the aha moment. It's really important that you remember characters should solve the problem. They might discover things that help them along the way, but it shouldn't be a random solution to the problem. Because then we applaud the character and we want them to be successful. If you just give them the answer to their problem, or the problem no longer exists because of some simple resolution, the reader goes away feeling the story is not particularly strong, or it's not particularly memorable. The other part of this is often there should be a twist to the story. It doesn't have to be a dramatic twist or something that's super incredibly unusual. It can be just something that's a little bit different, a little bit unexpected. Okay, the more unexpected, the more interesting your story is, but it has to fit the story. It can't be totally random and totally unassociated with the story you're trying to achieve. And then at the end of the story, we have the character come to their conclusion of the story and finish it all up. We call this the resolution. And it's where you go into more detail about the problem being solved. And there's often a coda or a moral to the story. Sometimes it can be the whole story. Perhaps the story was about bullying, and at the end there's a message for the reader. Sometimes it might be about not making assumptions about appearances. Other times there isn't a coda. It's just a story that tells of a character's attempt to solve a problem and their success or failure at doing so. One technique in order to do this is to have the character comment on the events of the story, but sometimes the actual action in the resolution will do it for you as well. And the very last feature of the story is the reorientation. Now, the reorientation, a number of things can happen. Often the character's life improves, or it always changes. They may go back to their old life, but the character will have become stronger or smarter or learned something about themselves or friends or whatever it might be, depending on your story. And their life might change. They might become rich and famous or whatever it might be, or they might go back to their normal life. Okay, your turn. Now that we've looked at the structure of a narrative and we've done descriptive writing, we've used figurative language, we've done characterization. Now I want you to look at your story and the structure of it. Look at your story and add sentences and paragraphs to make it follow the narrative structure. So far, none of the drafts that I've read has been perfect, so they all could do with some improvement. You may not need to add a whole new paragraph. It might be a sentence, it might be rearranging the paragraphs or sentences to make it fit the structure. Now, once you've done the standard structure, another interesting thing to do is to move the paragraphs around. You don't actually have to have the structure in the sequence I've shown you. That's the standard structure. But some people sometimes think that they like to start at the end of a story and flash back and actually work backwards. Or another technique is to start at the end and then flash back to the beginning and go through the story that way. Sometimes you might start in the middle. The only place you probably can't start is in rising tension, but you can certainly start at the climax, you can start at the resolution, you can start at the conclusion, you can start at the problem, and obviously you can start at the orientation. And sometimes they can make a story that might be fairly standard and normal. Sometimes that can help to make it a bit more unique and interesting to read. So after you've done all of the writing activities we've been trying to do so far, so that's being descriptive, creating a character, using figurative language, looking at your vocab, try to rearrange your structure and try to make sure that the structure follows that of a narrative. Okay, this is a fun activity to think about original stories. So down the left hand side here, you'll see prompts. Okay, and you can see they work in a 1 to 10 words. Okay, although this might not be 1. Okay, and this may not be 1 either. Okay, although it can be. It certainly doesn't have to. You don't have to have the first and the last name of a character. But use these prompts. Now there's nothing saying that David has to be a fat kid living in an old castle whose goal is to get rich and his obstacle is somebody dying. David, after all, could be a fat kid who is at a tropical resort and his goal is to, well, probably not to build an olden car, to win friends. But he has a phobia, okay? And then we add events, and what's his climax or turning point, what's the resolution, and what's the conclusion, okay? In the amount of words that you can see each category has, okay? So events has to have 5 words, okay? 5, yep. And then 6 for the second main event, 7 for the third main event, and they'll all actually have to go in the event section. Okay, 8 words describing the climax, 9 words stating the resolution, and 10 words describing the conclusion. And that could form the framework of a very interesting and original story. Remembering what I've said though about taking things from what you know. Don't be too ambitious or creative, or write about things you really don't know much about. There's no point writing about New York if you've never actually been to New York. But you can certainly write about a city because you live in a city, even though it's a small city, but you certainly can use that information.